Northwest pretty much as we were. Yes, the controlling numbers are much less and they're decreasing, but the ANC continues to hold the fort in the north of the country, in the northwest of the country. Let's come back to my analysts here in the studio. Just before we did our crossover, I asked about Action SA. They've come in much like EFF surprised at the last election, although some people say that we shouldn't have been, but we were. And it wasn't a small entry, it was dramatic. And it looks like Action SA have done the same in Gauteng in particular. So the question is, what can they do to sustain in the same way that the EFF have done? Or if they have been using smoke and mirrors and playing the game, will they become a COPE and UDM sooner rather than later?
So I think they were very strategic in targeting where they were going to launch. So they didn't do what the EFF did, which was to launch more broadly. They launched in very specific spaces. So the EFF came in at a national election, they came in at local. They did more of a National Freedom Party approach, which is strategic locations in municipalities where they spoke to people's concerns. If they wish to now catapult themselves into the national politics for 2024, their record, once they're in a coalition or once their councillors are in these councils, that will determine. And then the ability to read the room in national politics the way they did at local politics. And there the ask is tougher because you have to get a more, shall we say, broader approach. You have to speak to a wider array of people. And then to sustain that requires more than smoke and mirrors. Because the Ahang SA example is a very good launch, very good promise, and immediately after the election, almost instant demise.
Michael Beaumont this morning from Action SA was saying that they've made inroads in a wide area, even though it's in those in Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, mostly Gauteng, but that the other parties have strongholds in various parts of the city. What do we make of that then? Is that proof of concept that we can now roll it out, as it were? We've shown it in Gauteng, and maybe we can now roll it out for the rest of the country.
Look, I think it is still true in my view that Herman Mashaba wanted to go back to being mayor of Johannesburg. And I think that's his main focus for now. In other places like KwaZulu-Natal, he had to be convinced by other people that they do have the machinery and the organization that can help them win some seats. How he, if at all, he is going to get what he wants, remains to be seen. I don't think the numbers are supporting him. At best, I think he'll come in as number 3. And I think it may be difficult for him to negotiate his way into the mayorship of Johannesburg. And if he doesn't get that position, I don't know what platform he's going to use to position himself and to grow the Action SA. I think it will be dependent on whether he gets the position of mayor. If he gets it, I think he can, have a sleek public relation machinery around him that will make sure that he dominates the news and people begin to see him as somebody who can be president. But if he doesn't get the mayor of Johannesburg position, I think, the path is going to be much more difficult for him going forward.
All right, 54 hung councils, last count. So the question now becomes, do you, as political parties, try and secure coalitions with the same partners everywhere, or do you go municipality? What would
I
be
can't
ideal?
imagine that doing it blanket-wise would work, because there are too many players in those municipalities that could push you over the edge of the 50+. So we know that there are civic associations, there are small regional parties that you'd have to bring on board. And those, this time round, shouldn't be, and I keep saying this, coalitions of spite. You cannot go into these agreements to keep somebody else out of power. You actually have to begin to think of these as productive coalitions in which the principles that you stand for are crucial. You start doing obvious and transparent horse trading about what you want, what you're willing to let go of, what you're bringing on board. And it cannot just be you get some executive position and you get some executive position, as we've seen in Nelson Mandela Bay. It has to be substantial governance issues. And that, I think, is a very hard ask of political parties that have their desire for power. As the example of the EFF wanting a municipality that you've not won. And I think that's not just subverting the democratic process, it's denying it. Because you're saying, gift it to me. I want a gift in return. I want to trade. And once we start trading the democratic process, rather than trading on what we promise voters and what our priorities are, we're not sitting with coalitions, then we're sitting with a thug-like approach to politics that says, we're going to ignore what the people tell us. Sure. We will go into chambers as people's representatives. We will govern, but we will have no mandate and we'll ignore the mandate. And that's not useful. And I think coalitions of spite did the same thing. Sure. It didn't take into cognizance what people had voted for, what had been promised, and what could and could not be traded.
So has Herman shot himself in the foot when he says, under no circumstances will I talk to the ANC?
I don't think that he shot himself in the foot. I think that was, his message right from the beginning. When he started, Action SA, it was on criticizing the ANC, calling out the faults that the ANC is making, according to him. And he would look like a hypocrite if at a later stage, if the foundation of your campaign, is bashing the ANC, criticizing the ANC, calling out the things that you don't like about the ANC, and then in the end, you work with them in a coalition. That is not something that the base would like. The people who voted for him, I don't think they would like that. And I think that's what caused some problems for the Democratic Alliance, that they went into some kind of a working relationship with the EFF, and the voters of both parties don't see eye to eye, and I don't think that voters of the Democratic Alliance were happy with the Democratic Alliance working with the EFF and vice versa. But in the EFF, essentially there is one chap who is in charge of everything, and pretty much everybody falls behind him. It's a different situation with the Democratic Alliance. So I think if you hear also what John Steenhuisen has been saying, is that they will, work with other parties, but one party that they will never work with is the EFF. And that, I think, comes from the history that they had in the city of Johannesburg and in the city of Tshwane, and what their own research that they conduct tells them as regards, the views and the wishes of the base, of the voter base of the Democratic Alliance.
A question for both of you then. On the face of it, it looks like these parties are really far apart in terms of ideologies, whatever you want to call it. But who are probably more naturally likely to come together? Let's start with you, Angelo.
The tricky word there is naturally.
Yeah.
Because there will be no naturally coming together. Yeah. This will all be very unnatural kinds of connections. Right. And it'll be difficult for them, but they have to do it. So I don't think that ideology is the only reason people can't get together. There are the practicalities of governance that can bring people together. So if you agree as parties that you will focus on electricity infrastructure in municipalities, sewage and water waste removal infrastructure building, and that you will do these kinds of things instead of these larger ideological projects, many of which are not local government issues, right? Then you might stand a chance of actually working together. But if you start from the principle that support in the National Assembly for a constitutional amendment is the one thing that means you cannot work with these people on the ground, you are sacrificing a fight in one chamber in the possibility of working together in another. And that actually means you're not serving the people of the municipality. You are playing national politics at the local level. You're punishing people for national issues at the local level, and that's unacceptable.
All right, so, I mean, the big metros, it's the same players by and large. And so the equation in Pretoria, the equation in Johannesburg, and to a large extent the equation in Nelson Mandela Bay Metro, is similar. Who are the ones that probably will come together? Because I'm sure that each one doesn't want a long list of partners.
Yeah.
Would much prefer to find one big one or a couple to come together.
Yeah.
DA-ANC?
Look, what I think we are likely to see is, a number of partnerships between the ANC and the EFF. Maybe in some municipalities, ANC and the IFP as well. In terms of Action SA, the way I see it, the partner that they are most likely to work with will be the Democratic Alliance. But in a city like Nelson Mandela Bay, where you almost have the ANC and the DA in a dead heat, and the DA has already said that in that particular metro, they are not willing to work with the ANC. And when I look at the numbers, I don't see, options that allow the DA to form its own government or the ANC to form its own government. It looks like the ANC and the DA are condemned to work together in the city of Nelson Mandela Bay. But we'll have to wait and see how it's going to pan out. But just from that, indications are to me that we may have another difficult time in Nelson Mandela Bay, with these parties, maybe failing to form governments individually. Yeah.
Will Johannesburg and Pretoria be treated much like the EFF want to do, almost as if it's the same equation? That as these parties come together, they'll say, how do we deal with Tshwane? How do we deal with Johannesburg? Or will they have separate conversations?
I think they would have to have separate conversations. Yes. Whether they will is a different story. Also, we've had multi-party coalition government at municipal level in a metro in Cape Town under Helen Zille.
Right.
And it worked fairly well to a certain extent because these coalitions required the hard work and, were hammered out when Helen Zille was an astute politician at that local level, would sit with people. I mean, she sometimes told the story of traveling to Langa to go and find one councillor to talk to him into the middle of the night to get herself elected mayor and making the kind of deals. And that's the kind of hammering out that needs to start happening. And in Tshwane and in Johannesburg, different kinds of conversations would have to be had because there are different problems that have to be addressed. And if all these people are interested in his power, they will have these quick conversations and we will sit back where we were in 2017 with coalitions of spite that fall apart, don't work well, and the citizens and residents of the cities and towns then suffer because you have these non-functioning administrations where people have traded off positions rather than traded on principles.
One would like to think lessons have been learned. But human beings are funny creatures and they tend to do things that they do all the time. But for survival's sake, they can't do what they used to do. Yes. And do we have the maturity in the room, do you think, to do coalition differently this time around? Because they have to.
Look, I don't think that there is a maturity to do coalitions the right way. I think what we have are political parties and politicians that see, government as a means for them to advance themselves as individuals and their political parties. If you see many political parties now are talking about wanting to be in coalition governments, wanting to have, mayoral committee memberships, because that gives them access to state resources. It gives them access to power. It gives them, access to the kind of traction that they would need on a public relations level, because if you are a member of the mayoral committee, you have, responsibilities, you have a budget, you have service delivery, channels, and therefore you can interact with people more and grow yourself more and have a track record of having been in government. So I don't think that it is, for them, it is about serving people. I think it's about self-positioning. And I think one of the problems that we face in South Africa is that it is terribly costly to run elections, but you have a populace that isn't as well off as it is in other countries where you have members of a political party supporting it financially. So in South Africa, they are dependent more on donations and donor funding, which will be drying up now because of the new legislation. So many political parties and many politicians are going to be looking at government for them to be able to get access so that they can sustain themselves. And I think, an example is that of Herman Mashaba, who was mayor, for 3 years or so. And you see his campaign looking like a sleek campaign. A well-oiled campaign. And I think many people will see that once I get into power, I will have access and I can be able to. I really do not think that for many of these political parties and politicians, it's about the people and service delivery. I don't think so. I am very happy to be proven wrong.
Yeah, but this is why we're here, because it was about self-serving interests, but they can't do that anymore, especially 2 years away from elections.
Well, the cautionary tale is Spain, right? Where you had a groundswell movement of Podemos rising up against what they call, the center, where it was a revolving door between business and government. And as you've just pointed out, it's not just that you have access to the state resources, which are meager as they may be, given that revenue collection is low. It's to the small business networks that you have access to that then brings you in funding, and you can then use your government post as a precursor for going into some kind of business relationship. That's the example in Spain. Eventually, the younger people saw that this meant a dead end for them because the elderly were sharing the spoils among themselves. And so we need to look to these other polities. And it's in the civic arrangements, in these civic associations, in the residents' associations, that one is beginning to see communities standing together to wrestle back control of their municipalities from political party patronage networks. And I think there is a moment that must be explored by communities, and the successes of Bushbuck Ridge, in Nama Khoi municipality, in Kanaland municipality, of people actually standing together as professionals with working class people to make sure that this isn't just about party patronage, but that the things that need to be done in the municipality get done because the residents have an investment. Now, it's easy in a small municipality. In a city, in a metro, it's infinitely more complex because you're dealing with millions of people with conflicting class interests, and that's tough.
All right, okay. Still so much more to discuss and explore, but I think let's take another look at those numbers, and I'm going to come to you this time, Dr.